good evening, and welcome back to Tranquil Arc Chronicles, endless horrories for sleepless nights. Tonight, the fog doesn't roll in from the sea. It drifts down from the mountains, soft and silent, carrying the scent of pine and old varnish. The lamps along the narrow streets of Winden Hollow flicker against the wind, their light trembling against windows lined with lace curtains and carved wooden shutters. Somewhere, a music box plays, faint, metallic, and slightly out of tune. They say it comes from the old toy shop at the corner of Brindle Street, a shop that hasn't opened its doors in years. The paint is cracked, the glass fogged with age, but the shelves inside remain full, rows upon rows of dolls, puppets, and marionettes, all perfectly preserved. Their glass eyes catch what little light remains and hold it like secrets. No one remembers when the last child disappeared, or rather, no one dares to, because in Winden Hollow, remembering has become a dangerous act. Every missing child leaves something behind, a handcrafted doll, small but lifelike, wearing the child's clothes, sitting quietly where they once slept. The elders whisper about a man, a craftsman, who once built toys so perfect they seemed to breathe. They called him the Dollmaker. No one ever saw his face clearly, only the shadow that moved behind his shop window long after midnight. When the church bells ring 13 times instead of 12, they say his shadow walks again, carrying unfinished dolls that whisper in their boxes. Close your eyes for a moment. Picture narrow cobblestone streets bathed in cold moonlight. Imagine the sound of a creaking sign swaying above a shuttered toy shop. Smell the faint blend of sawdust, oil, and something else, sweet but wrong, like sugared rot. Tonight, the shop lights flicker once more. A new doll has appeared, and somewhere in the silence, a child's voice hums a lullaby that no one taught them. Chapter 1. The first doll, the town of Winden Hollow, had a peculiar way of keeping secrets. It was small, the kind of place that never made it onto maps unless someone insisted. Nestled between rolling pinewood hills and a river that ran too still to be trusted. From a distance, it looked like a postcard. Steep roofs dusted with snow, narrow lanes lined with gas lamps, the distant chime of the old clock tower marking each hour with eerie precision. But if you stayed long enough, you'd notice something else. The silences between those chimes, too long, too hollow. That silence had weight. People here walked quickly after sunset. Curtains were drawn before the evening mist touched the windows. Even the dogs refused to bark at night. On Brindle Street, the cobblestones glistened with frost. At the far end stood a toy shop with a faded sign that read Marrek's Miniatures and Mechanical Marvels. The sign creaked as it swung, though no wind moved. Inside, shelves bowed under the weight of wooden horses, soldiers, carousels, and porcelain-faced dolls, each perfect, each still. No one remembered when Marrek left. Some said he vanished during the winter storm of 1912. Others swore he still lived inside, too old or too broken to come out. Children dared each other to peer through the window, but none lasted long. For sometimes the dolls blinked. That was before the first disappearance. The missing child, it began quietly, as all horrors do. Her name was Elsa Varen, age 9. She lived above her father's bakery on Weaver's Row, a bright, curious girl with a ribbon perpetually tangled in her hair and a laugh that carried across the market square. One evening, she didn't come home. Her mother, Annette, assumed she'd fallen asleep at a friend's. The constable assumed she'd wandered off to play. The town assumed she'd be found by morning. Morning came. Elsa didn't. What they found instead was a doll. It sat on the steps of the bakery, wrapped in Elsa's favorite shawl. Its hair was the same pale gold, tied with the same ribbon. Its dress was sewn from fabric that matched the one Annette had made the week before. Its tiny porcelain hands were painted delicately, but one of them, the left, had a faint smear of red beneath the fingernail. The constable lifted the doll with gloved hands. It was warm. Annette screamed so long her voice broke. The town meeting by dusk, the square filled with whispers. The mayor, a tired man with a trembling mustache, stood before the townsfolk. "It's a cruel prank," he insisted. "Children don't vanish into thin air." But as he spoke, a woman at the back clutched her son tighter. For she'd seen something that morning, a shadow behind the shutters of the old toy shop. It moved like a man, but not quite. The limbs too slow, the posture too still, like a marionette whose strings were pulled from somewhere unseen. "Impossible," said the constable. "That shop's been locked for years." Yet when they went to look, the faintest light flickered behind the fogged glass. The boy who dared. 2 nights later, 3 boys, Thomas, Henry, and little Emile, crept down Brindle Street with a lantern and a dare. They were only supposed to peek, to press their faces to the window, count to 5, and run. But Emile, the youngest, noticed something the others didn't. The door was slightly ajar. A breath of cold air slipped through, smelling of wax, wood polish, and something faintly sweet like caramel and decay. "Don't," Thomas whispered. But Emile was already stepping inside. The lantern light caught rows of glass eyes staring back, hundreds of dolls, each positioned as though mid-motion. Some sat on chairs, others stood behind counters. One was cradled in a wooden cradle that rocked by itself, creaking gently in rhythm with Emile's heartbeat. Then came a sound. A faint tap-tap from the back room, like someone working late. "Mr. Marrek," Emile called softly. The tapping stopped. A shadow fell across the far wall, tall, stooped, and elongated, as if stretched by a light source that didn't exist. Emile took one step backward, then another. The dolls' heads turned slowly, in unison, toward him. The lantern went out. When the other boys screamed and ran, they didn't realize Emile hadn't followed. Not until morning. The second doll, by dawn, Constable Reddick found something on the steps of the toy shop. A doll, smaller than the first, its face unmistakably carved in Emile's likeness. His freckles were perfect, each brushstroke precise. Its eyes, unlike the first doll's, were open. The constable locked the shop that same day and sealed it with a wax crest. He swore the smell inside lingered on his clothes, wax, dust, and the faintest trace of blood. But that night, someone broke the seal. The old woman at the edge of town lived, Greta Lorne, the oldest woman in Winden Hollow. She rarely spoke, except to mutter to herself or to the ravens that gathered near her gate. When the second child disappeared, she came to the constable's office, clutching an old tin box. Inside were yellowed newspaper clippings, each more unsettling than the last. Local craftsman's family perishes in fire. Only son survives. The miracle dollmaker of Winden Hollow, Elias Marrek's toys speak, move. Closure ordered. Allegations of human hair found in toys. Greta pointed a trembling finger at the final clipping. He never left, she said. He only learned to make them better. The constable dismissed her, called her senile. But that night, he dreamt of dolls crawling from their boxes, faces smiling too wide, voices whispering his name. The third vanishing. It didn't take long for the next child to disappear. This time, a little girl named Lottie, who lived near the churchyard. Her father, a mason, found her window open and her bed cold. On the windowsill, a footprint, too small for an adult, too precise for a shoe. When they searched the town, they found nothing. But on the altar inside the chapel, lying among the candles, sat another doll. This one's eyes were half closed, its head tilted as if asleep. When Father Gerald tried to lift it, its head turned toward him just slightly. He dropped it and crossed himself. By dawn, the chapel door was found ajar. The doll was gone. The shadow returns. Fear turned to ritual. Parents nailed crucifixes above cradles, buried mirrors, and burned old toys. Children were forbidden to play outside after sunset. Yet every few nights, the smell of candle wax drifted through the streets, and from somewhere deep within Brindle Street came the sound of a lullaby played on an unseen music box. They said the melody changed each time a new doll appeared. One evening, as the mist rolled thick across the town, Annette Varin, Elsa's mother, heard knocking at her door. 3 slow knocks. When she opened it, no one was there, only a package tied with twine. Inside lay a wooden box. Inside the box, a doll she had never seen, but it was holding something in its tiny hand, a note. The handwriting was impossibly neat, written in old-fashioned ink. To fix what is broken, one must first understand the shape of the soul. Yours was most beautiful, E.M. Annette screamed, and for the first time in years, the lights in Marrek's toy shop blazed to life. The Dollmaker speaks. By the time the townsfolk reached Brindle Street, the windows were glowing. Through the mist, shadows danced on the walls, dozens, maybe hundreds, moving like puppets on invisible strings. And then a voice echoed, soft, rasping, almost tender. "They don't vanish," it said. "They stay. They stay with me." The door creaked open on its own. The dolls on the shelves turned their heads toward the crowd, eyes gleaming like wet glass. Constable Reddick drew his pistol. But before he could step forward, the lights went out. In the silence, the sound of hundreds of tiny wooden feet scuttled across the floor. That night, the town of Winden Hollow changed forever. When the sun rose, the shop stood empty again. No dolls, no light, no trace of anyone inside, except one thing, a single doll left on the counter, its face unfinished, its eyes blank, and its mouth carved open in a silent scream. Beneath it lay a scrap of paper. Chapter 2. The hollow children mourning broke over Winden Hollow like a dull blade scraping over bone. No birds sang, no chimneys smoked. The frost clung stubbornly to rooftops and cobblestones alike, as though the night had decided to linger a little longer. Constable Reddick had not slept. His uniform still smelled faintly of candle wax and the faint copper temps of fear. The events at Marrek's toy shop played again and again behind his eyes. The voice, the shifting shadows, the dolls that moved when no one touched them. He told himself it had been hysteria, that the mist had warped their sight, that grief had made them see what they feared. But when he reached for his notebook that morning, he found something that made his hand tremble. It was not his notebook at all. It was a child's drawing, done in chalk and smeared finger paint. A picture of Marrek's toy shop, the crooked sign swinging above the door. And in every window, tiny faces stared out, hundreds of them. At the bottom, written in clumsy letters, "We see you." The council's silence by noon, the mayor had ordered silence. "Superstition breeds panic," he said. "We cannot afford another exodus." An exodus, as though this had happened before. The townsfolk murmured in the square, huddling close, as if their voices might summon the thing they dared not name. Mothers clutched their children tighter. Fathers nailed shut toy chests, burned dollhouses, and stuffed cloth animals into furnaces. Yet, no matter how much they destroyed, the toys returned. A wooden horse left to burn reappeared on the porch, untouched. A doll smashed to pieces was found whole the next morning, sitting politely on the windowsill. The church bell tolled, slow and uneven, 1, 2, and then 13 times. The same night, Greta Lorne came to the chapel steps, her white hair matted from the rain, clutching that same tin box to her chest. "They won't stop," she croaked. "He's remaking them one by one." Father Gerald led her inside. The candles flickered, their flames bending sideways as though something had exhaled across them. "What are they?" he asked. "Ghosts." She shook her head slowly. "Not ghosts. Echoes, things wearing the memory of children like a mask. The whispering doll that evening, a woman named Clara Benton, awoke to the sound of someone humming in her daughter's room. A soft, lilting tune, familiar but wrong, sung as if underwater. She rose, heart pounding, and opened the door. Her daughter Mira sat upright in bed, her eyes unfocused. In her lap was a doll, not one Clara had ever seen before. Its face was pale, smooth, almost featureless, except for two delicate indentations where the eyes should have been. "Mira," Clara whispered. "Where did you get that?" "The man gave it to me," the girl said softly. "He said she needs a voice." Clara froze. "What man?" "The man in the shadow," Mira replied. "He said he makes children better." The doll's head tilted a fraction too far, too slow. When Clara reached for it, she felt heat, faint, pulsing, as though the doll had a heartbeat. She dropped it. It landed upright, perfectly balanced, and began to hum. Mira's eyes rolled back, the gathering fear by morning. The doll and the child were gone. Only the bedsheet remained, twisted into a rough shape, 2 arms, 2 legs, and a hollow where the face should be. Word spread fast. The constable ordered every toy confiscated. Dozens of crates filled with dolls, wooden animals, and marionettes were carried to the town square for burning. But when the pyre was lit, the flames wouldn't catch. The wood hissed and steamed as if soaked in something alive. The air stank of varnish and wet clay. And then came the sound, faint at first, then unmistakable, children laughing, not from the crowd, from the crates. A doll burst open, its porcelain face cracking to reveal something pale and twitching inside. Not flesh, but layers of wood, carved into a semblance of veins and muscle. It moved, spasming like a creature learning to breathe. The crowd screamed. Father Geralt stepped forward, cross raised high. In the name of God, the fire roared to life before he could finish. The dolls burned, but as they did, they sang. 100 tiny voices, humming the same tune Clara Benton had heard in her daughter's room. The journal after the pyre, Reddick could no longer deny what he'd seen. He returned to the toy shop, this time alone, breaking the constable's seal once more. The air inside was colder than the street, and each step echoed as though he were walking in a hollowed-out chest. On the workbench, amid shavings of wood and curls of copper wire, lay a leather-bound journal. Its cover was embossed with the initials E.M. He opened it. Perfection lies not in creation, but in continuation. The soul is only limited by the body's frailty. If one can craft a vessel durable enough, the soul might persist. The first attempts failed. The wood cracked. The voices would not stay. He turned the page. Success requires something alive at the moment of transfer. Reddick's stomach turned. He flipped further. Each page became more erratic drawings of human anatomy, notes about preserving warmth, diagrams of dolls with hearts carved into them. Then a final entry: the children are perfect, so pure, so willing. Their laughter becomes life. The last page was smeared with fingerprints, small ones. The hollow room behind the workbench, a trapdoor, hidden beneath a rug, its iron ring cold to the touch. Reddick hesitated, then pulled it open. The scent that rose from below was sweet sugar, oil, and the faint iron of old blood. He descended the narrow steps, lantern in hand. The room beneath was enormous, far larger than the toy shop above. Tables lined the walls, each holding half-finished dolls. But these weren't made entirely of wood. Some had real hair, others fragments of skin. And in the center, a massive structure, something like a child-sized carousel. But instead of horses, dolls hung suspended from wires, heads drooping, arms limp. A mechanical crank turned slowly, as though moved by a phantom hand. Reddick approached, unable to breathe. The air hummed faintly. The dolls' mouths began to open, one by one. From each came a whisper, not a sound of air, but of memory. "Mama, cold. Don't let him," he stumbled back, nearly dropping the lantern. And then, from the corner of the room, came a low creak. A door, one he hadn't noticed before, slowly opening. Something moved beyond it, a shadow, tall and bent, its outline unmistakably human, yet wrong, as though carved from something too rigid to bend. "Mr. Marrek," Reddick whispered. The shadow tilted its head. Then the lantern flickered once, twice, and went out. The return when morning came. The townsfolk found the constable's badge outside the toy shop door. It was covered in varnish. No one entered after that. The mayor ordered the building bricked up, and within days, the street was deserted. But the silence didn't last. Children began speaking in their sleep. They whispered names: Elsa, Emil, Mira, names no living child should know. They spoke of a man who worked under the floor, of dolls that wanted to come home. At first, the parents thought it was trauma, but one night, Greta Lorne heard it too. From the empty house across the road came a sound she hadn't heard since her own son vanished 50 years earlier. A lullaby, played faintly on a music box that should have long been broken. She looked out the window, and there, at the end of Brindle Street, the toy shop's windows glowed faintly once again. Chapter 3: The Dollmaker's Workshop. The fog in Winden Hollow had thickened over the years, not the ordinary kind that rolled down from the mountains, but a denser, older mist that seemed to cling to memory itself. Greta Lorne had lived long enough to know when a place remembered too much. She had seen the town change, children grow, houses crumble, graves multiply, and yet the air remained the same, heavy with the scent of sawdust and candle smoke. Now, with her joints aching and her eyesight dim, she had begun to hear the whispers again, the ones she'd first heard as a child when Elias Marrek still walked among them. That morning, Greta woke before dawn. Her heart beat too fast, her dreams too vivid. She'd seen the toy shop again, not as it was now, sealed and cold, but as it had been before the fire, light pouring from the windows, music boxes chiming in perfect synchrony, and Elias himself smiling gently as he handed a doll to a little boy who looked far too pale to be alive. She sat up, gasping. The ravens outside her window cawed in unison, their cries cutting through the fog like splinters of sound. "It's time," she muttered to herself, reaching for the tin box she kept beneath her bed. Inside were the same yellowed clippings she'd shown Constable Reddick, but there was more now. Letters, receipts, a brittle photograph of Elias Marrek standing before his shop, his face half shaded by the brim of his hat. His eyes, though, were clear, pale, sharp, and disturbingly kind. Greta dressed slowly, wrapped herself in her heavy wool coat, and set out toward the municipal archives at the edge of town. The records room. The archives smelled of mildew and secrets. Shelves groaned beneath ledgers that hadn't been opened in decades. The caretaker, an old man named Piers, looked up from his desk when Greta entered. "Back again, Mrs. Lorne?" he asked softly, as if afraid to disturb something sleeping between the walls. "I need the death records for 1871, she said, "and anything on the Marrek family." He hesitated. "That name again, you won't find much. Fire destroyed most of those papers." "I'll find what's left," she replied. Piers sighed, but led her through the aisles, his lantern swaying, casting long skeletal shadows across the shelves. He stopped before a drawer labeled MO 1872 1875. The records inside were warped, ink blurred by water damage, but one entry was still legible. Marrek, Lydia, age 32. Cause of death, house fire, December 14th, 1871. Survived by son Elias, age 12. Another entry followed, dated the same day. Marrek, Tomas, age 36. Burned beyond recognition. Greta's breath caught. Both parents, the same night. Piers nodded grimly. Whole house went up. Folks said it was the furnace. Others said Elias caused it himself. Strange boy, they said, used to talk to his toys. Greta turned the page. There was one more entry, written in a different hand, shaky, hurried, recovered items, fragments of porcelain dolls fused to bone. She stared at the words until the ink seemed to swim. The whispering ink back at her cottage, Greta spread the papers across her table. The candlelight trembled. Her house creaked under the weight of age. As she studied the photograph again, she noticed something she hadn't before. In the reflection of the shop window behind Elias stood a figure, a child, or something shaped like one. Its head was tilted, its limbs wrong. The flame bent sideways as if pulled by breath. From the hallway came a faint click, 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 the sound of small wooden feet. Greta froze. Her old rocking chair moved once, gently, as though nudged by a passing hand. "Not now," she whispered, voice trembling. "Not again." The noise stopped. She closed her eyes and pressed her palms to the table. "If you want to be heard," she said softly, "then tell me." The candle flared. The photograph curled at the edges. Letters rearranged themselves in her mind. Not ink, but thought. He never left. The Dollmaker's apprentice. The next day, Greta visited the old schoolhouse. It had long since closed, but the blackboards remained, the air still faintly chalky. She found what she was looking for in the class register from 1872. Elias Marrek, excused indefinitely, medical leave. Beneath his name, another entry caught her eye. Instructor Abram Voss. Greta remembered that name. Voss had been the school's carpenter and mechanic, a tinkerer who built models and taught the children about gears and clockwork. Rumor said he'd taken Elias under his wing after the fire. In the margin, written in faded pencil, was a note. The boy's hands shake when idle, but when he carves, they do not. She turned another page. He speaks to the dolls now. Another, he says, they answer. Greta's throat tightened. She could almost hear the sound of a young boy's knife carving through wood, shaping fingers, lips, eyes. She could almost see the soft concentration in his face, a child rebuilding the world that burned around him. And then she found the last entry, the Dollmaker's workshop, beneath the shop in the cellar. Says he'll make her again, his mother. The ink ended there, blotted by a drop of something darker than water. Returned to Brindle Street by twilight, Greta stood once again before the bricked facade of Marrek's miniatures and mechanical marvels. The frost had begun to settle. Her breath came out white and quick. She brought no lantern, only a small oil lamp and the tin box that had become her companion through the years. She touched the bricks. The mortar was brittle. A single push dislodged a loose stone. "I told you I'd come back," she murmured. The opening widened enough for her to crawl through. Inside, the air was still. Time seemed suspended. Dust hung like fog. The scent of polish, wax, and faint decay still lingered, as though the last breath of the shop had been caught mid-exhale. Her lamp flickered across the shelves, all empty now. The dolls were gone, but faint outlines remained on the wood, like shadows burned into memory. Greta moved behind the counter. Her heart knew where to look. Beneath the rug, the trapdoor, the same one Constable Reddick had found. The iron ring was rusted, but it yielded to her trembling grip. The smell rose stronger now, sickly sweet, tinged with oil, and something like honey turned sour. The descent, the steps, creaked beneath her weight. The light dimmed as she descended, until only the lamp's thin glow remained. At the bottom, the room stretched vast and circular, carved directly into the stone. Tables stood in rows, each covered in parts, limbs, eyes, wigs, torsos, all meticulously labeled. But these were not ordinary doll parts. Many were too realistic, too organic. In one corner, a phonograph crackled softly, though no hand had wound it. A child's voice hummed the same lullaby that had haunted Winden Hollow for decades. Greta's lamp trembled. She followed the sound. There, the carousel, the one Constable Reddick had described before his disappearance. It still turned, ever so slightly, powered by something unseen. But now she saw what he hadn't. Beneath it, rows of glass canisters filled with clear fluid. Floating inside were small, indistinct shapes, fingers, eyes, fragments of dolls, or perhaps not dolls at all. Her breath hitched. A whisper came from the shadows. Mrs. Lorne. Her name, spoken with impossible familiarity. She turned sharply, raising the lamp. The light fell upon a wall lined with portraits, charcoal sketches pinned with rusted nails. Each face belonged to a child long gone from Winden Hollow. Each sketch was signed in the same looping hand, E. Marrek, and at the center, a portrait of her son, not as he'd been, but as he'd looked in the coffin, pale, still, a small wooden figure clutched in his hands. She dropped the lamp. It shattered, spilling fire across the floor. The flames caught the varnish, spreading fast. But before she could flee, she saw something moving behind the carousel. A figure stepped forward, its joints creaking faintly, the sound of wood bending where it shouldn't. He was tall, impossibly thin, his face half hidden beneath a cracked porcelain mask. One eye shone faintly through the gap. "Elias," she breathed. The figure tilted its head, a gesture both curious and mournful. "You remember," he said softly, his voice hollow but clear. "I made him perfect for you." Greta's knees weakened. You used him." "I preserved him," Marrek said, stepping closer. "You let him die. I gave him forever." Behind him, the carousel turned faster, the dolls swaying like bodies in a storm. "They're not hollow," Marrek whispered. "They're waiting." The fire spread to the tables, the air filled with the sickly sweetness of melting wax and burning varnish. Greta stumbled backward toward the stairs. Marrek didn't follow. He only watched, the light reflecting off his mask like a second, unmoving face. "Tell them," he said. "Tell them I keep them safe." She climbed the steps, choking on smoke. When she reached the door, she looked back once more. The carousel had stopped. The dolls hung still, and Elias Marrek, the dollmaker, was gone. Outside, the air was cold and clean. Greta collapsed onto the cobblestones, clutching her chest. The fog swirled above, whispering in tones she couldn't name. When she opened her eyes, she saw the toy shop's window glowing faintly through the smoke. In the window sat a new doll, a woman's likeness. Wrinkled hands, shawl around her shoulders, eyes painted gray. Its lips were parted, and as the flames consumed the shop, the doll smiled. Chapter 4. The Song of Sawdust and Bone. The dawn after the fire came quietly. The townsfolk of Winden Hollow gathered at the edge of Brindle Street, staring at the blackened wreck of Marrek's miniatures and mechanical marvels. The smoke still rose in thin blue streams. The sign above the doorway had fallen, its letters warped but still legible. Marvels of life. No one spoke for a long while. The only sound was the crunch of soot beneath their boots, and if one listened too long, a faint ticking, like the dying heartbeat of a clock deep underground. Greta Lorne sat wrapped in a wool blanket near the constable's wagon, her skin blistered by the heat, her hands trembling as though the fire still burned inside her. She had not said a word since they found her, lying in the street before dawn, muttering only one sentence again and again: "He made them to keep me company." The doctor had begged her to rest. She had refused. The diary of Greta Lorne, recovered from her bedside table, dated 1 week after the fire. "I cannot sleep. The song won't stop. I hear it in the walls, under the floors. It hums through my bones, the same lullaby he played in the cellar. They think I'm delusional. They think I breathed in too much smoke. But the song has rhythm, pattern, design. It isn't madness, it's a message." Marrek wasn't building toys. He was trying to perfect memory. Greta's handwriting trailed downward, looping tighter, as though her strength waned with each word. He used their remains not for cruelty, but to preserve them, to hold the moment of love, fear, and innocence forever. That's what he believed. But he forgot that memory decays, too, even in wood. I saw the dolls breathe before the fire reached them. I saw their eyes follow me. They knew my name, and tonight the ticking has returned. The final line was written in a different ink, as if added later. Hurriedly, he's in the smoke. Ashes of the workshop Constable Reddick returned to the ruins a week later with 2 men and a lantern. The air still smelled of varnish and copper. The ground was unstable, pocked with holes where timbers had burned through. They searched for remains, but found none. No bones, no body. Instead, they discovered something else. Beneath a layer of charred debris, a faint metallic gleam caught Reddick's eye. He brushed away the soot to reveal a phonograph cylinder, miraculously intact. He lifted it carefully. The label, though smeared, still bore 3 words written in Marrek's elegant hand for her voice. Reddick pocketed the cylinder and climbed out of the ruins, heart heavy, unsure why he trembled more at that moment than during any murder scene he'd ever witnessed. The song begins again that night. Greta's cottage windows glowed faintly through the fog. Inside, her fire had burned low. The constable knocked once, no answer. When he entered, the air was unnaturally still. The phonograph sat on her table, its needle hovering above a blank wax disc. The tin box lay open beside it, empty. Greta was seated in her rocking chair, her eyes half open, staring toward the door. On her lap rested a doll, newly painted, its face an exact replica of her own. In the hearth, the flames flickered in rhythm. Tick, tick, tick. Reddick's breath caught as he noticed the phonograph had changed. The cylinder he'd found earlier now attached to it, though he hadn't touched it. The machine began to turn. A crackle, then a voice. For her voice, Elias Marrek whispered. For her song, and then the lullaby began. Soft, sweet, endless. The doll's eyes rolled upward, its mouth parted, and in Greta's own voice, it began to hum. The awakening below, miles beneath Winden Hollow. In the earth where the cellar once stood, something stirred. The flames had eaten through wood and plaster, but not through iron. In the darkness, dozens of clockwork hearts began to tick again, faintly at first, then together, in rhythm. Hands twitched, porcelain faces cracked and healed. Gears turned beneath false skin. One by one, they opened their eyes. The carousel still stood, blackened and warped. From its center, a single note echoed the continuation of the same lullaby. But now, it wasn't Elias who played it, it was them. They remembered the fire, the pain, the unfinished touch of their maker. And they remembered Greta, the woman who had seen them, spoken to them, pitied them. In unison, they began to whisper through mouths of wax and wire. Mother. The sound carried upward through soil and stone. Above ground, the fog over Winden Hollow thickened once more. The clocks in every home began to tick out of sync. The dolls in children's rooms' gifts, long forgotten, turned their heads toward the window as though listening. And in Greta's cottage, the phonograph continued to play long after her fire went out. The lullaby did not end. It never would. Excerpt from the Winden Hollow Gazette, February 3rd, 1894. Following the recent fire at Marrek's Miniatures and the mysterious death of local historian Mrs. Greta Lorne, townspeople report hearing music emanating from beneath Brindle Street during the night. Several residents have relocated. Others refuse to speak of it at all. Constable Reddick, who led the initial investigation, has been missing since last Thursday. His home was found empty, save for a child's wooden toy spinning endlessly upon his desk. Chapter 5. The unfinished children, the fog over Winden Hollow had thickened into a dense, living shroud by the time Greta Lorne had closed the doors to her cottage. The fire at Marrek's workshop had burned itself down to ash, yet a faint hum lingered in the air, like an echo trapped between the walls. It was not wind, it was not birds. It was a sound she remembered from her childhood, a lullaby sung in a language older than the town itself, carried on the breath of sawdust and candle smoke. She could feel it pressing against her, vibrating through the floorboards, threading into her bones, and in that vibration she heard them, the dolls, or perhaps not dolls at all, but the children they had once been. Their echoes, stitched into wood and porcelain, had never left. They had only waited, silent and patient, for the moment when they could awaken. It began with the ticking, a slow, rhythmic tick, as though the heart of Winden Hollow had started to beat again after decades of quiet. Greta froze in the middle of her room, the tin box from beneath her bed clutched tightly in her hand. The dolls' voices rose faintly beneath it, imperceptible at first, like the murmur of wind through dead leaves. Then the ticking became a chorus, a symphony of wood and wire, joined by the softest whispers. Greta, her breath caught. The name was carried through the floorboards, through the walls, through the thick fog itself. It was not angry. It was curious, patient, expectant. She dropped the tin box. Its contents rattled and clinked, the sound echoing in the small cottage-like distant chimes. She could feel the presence of them, the unfinished children gathering, pulling the memory of their lives into this small room. She knelt on the floor, hands trembling. She had to see them, had to understand. Her eyes adjusted to the dim light, and there, emerging from the shadows, they appeared. Not fully formed, not fully human, not fully dolls, but somewhere in between. Limbs jointed in ways they should not bend, faces smooth, but beginning to crack like porcelain in candle heat, eyes blank yet knowing. They moved as one, synchronized, their tiny feet whispering across the wooden floor. And at the center of their circle lay one doll, smaller than the rest, still unfinished. Its chest rose faintly, unevenly, and Greta realized, with a shock, that it was breathing a mechanical imitation of life that had somehow become real. "They are awake," she whispered. A voice, fractured and soft, came from the unfinished doll. "We are incomplete." The words were spoken as if through water, distorted and strange, yet perfectly intelligible. Greta's chest tightened. She could feel the weight of their collective memory pressing against her mind. Every fear, every joy, every moment they had lived, or been made to live, surged through her like a wave. She had glimpsed parts of it before, in the ruins of the workshop, but now it was whole, vast, overwhelming. "They remember him," Greta said aloud, her voice shaking. "They remember Marrek." "Yes," another doll whispered. Its voice was higher, fragile, but carried a weight beyond its tiny frame. He built us to remember, to preserve, but the song was broken. The song must be finished. Greta's eyes traveled across the room. Each doll, each unfinished child was looking at her, and she realized they were expecting guidance, or perhaps judgment, or perhaps release. The line between fear and familiarity blurred. They were not monsters, they were echoes, shadows of innocence, carved into wood, preserved in wax, trapped between moments. The unfinished doll stirred, pushing against the floor with uneven, spasmodic motions. Greta's hand hovered over it. I don't know how, she whispered. You will, said a chorus of voices, now all together, yet distinct. You remember. You must help us finish the song. And in that moment, Greta understood. The dolls did not seek revenge. They sought completion. The echo of lives halted too soon, of childhoods stolen and preserved against their will. They had begun to dream, to think, to remember, and the unfinished doll, the youngest, the smallest, the most delicate, held the key to their awakening. The room seemed to pulse with life. Shadows shifted across walls. Candle flames stretched unnaturally, and the floorboards groaned as though the house itself were breathing. Greta reached out, her fingers trembling, and touched the unfinished doll's chest. Warmth radiated from it, faint but undeniable, and the mechanical heartbeat beneath it synchronized with her own. Name her, a voice whispered. She must have a voice. Greta's throat tightened. The name that came to her lips was soft, almost reverent. Lysa. The doll's head tilted slightly, and a note, long missing from the lullaby that had haunted Winden Hollow for decades, emerged. It was a sound that was neither fully human nor fully mechanical, a bridging of memory and creation, sorrow and hope. And as the note filled the room, the other dolls responded, one by one, joining in a harmony that was eerie, beautiful, and impossible. They moved closer, forming a circle around Greta and Lysa, their voices intertwined with the newly completed note, creating a song that vibrated through the walls, through the floor, through the earth itself. Greta's knees weakened. She fell to her hands and stared at them, seeing their forms clearly now. Small hands, cracked porcelain faces, wooden joints worn smooth by years of waiting. And in their eyes, she saw the memories of the children they had once been. Laughter, tears, whispered secrets, bedtime stories, long forgotten. They are not hollow, she said aloud, voice trembling. They are alive. Yes, the voices said in unison. And now you must see. The floor beneath them shifted. Greta gasped as the wooden planks parted, revealing a narrow stairwell leading downward. Smoke from the fire had long since cleared, but the air was thick here, heavy with the scent of varnish, wax, and something far older. The dolls began to descend first, careful, deliberate, their movements unnerving in their grace. Greta followed, guided by the faint hum of the lullaby, the pulse of memory, and the warmth radiating from Lysa at the bottom. They emerged into the remains of the workshop, larger and more intact than Greta remembered. Tables, tools, shelves lined with fragments of dolls, all untouched by the fire. The carousel stood in the center, warped but still magnificent. Its mechanisms worry softly, awaiting life, and around it the dolls gathered, their attention focused on Lysa. Greta understood immediately. The unfinished doll was the key. Completing her song, her heartbeat, her essence would ripple outward, bringing completion to the others. They were fragments, echoes, waiting to become whole. And she, Greta, was the conduit. She approached the carousel. Lysa climbed onto the platform, and the other dolls followed, forming a circle around it. Greta placed her hands gently on Lysa's shoulders. "This is your life," she whispered. "Finish it." The room vibrated with a crescendo of sound, the ticking of clockwork, the soft scrape of wood, the harmonic resonance of porcelain against porcelain. Light shifted, bending around the figures, casting them in a glow that was neither candlelight nor sun. The dolls' eyes glowed faintly, their mouths moved, forming words they could not yet speak. Their limbs flexed with newfound freedom, and then, in unison, they sang. A lullaby of wood and bone, of lost childhoods and stolen innocence, of hope and grief intertwined. Greta's own voice joined theirs, trembling at first, then stronger, harmonizing with the chorus of the unfinished children. The room swelled with the music, the memory, the life that had once been trapped in cold, hard forms. Each note completed a fragment, each phrase restored a memory, each pause breathed new existence. When the song ended, or when Greta perceived it had ended, though such perceptions seemed almost meaningless here, the dolls were still, but alive in a way she could feel. Their wooden fingers flexed, their porcelain eyes blinked, and Lysa's chest rose and fell with a rhythm that matched her own. The carousel spun once, gently, as if acknowledging their passage from shadow to being. Greta fell to the floor, exhausted, her heart racing with awe and terror. She looked around at the dolls, now fully present, fully sentient. They regarded her with quiet gratitude, not fear, not malice, only recognition. "Thank you," Lysa said, softly, "for remembering." Greta smiled weakly. "No," she whispered. "Thank you for waiting." The workshop was quiet again, the lullaby fading to the softest echo. But the dolls were no longer unfinished. They had life, they had memory. And in the center of it all, the tiny figure of Lysa stood, complete and whole, a testament to the Dollmaker's ambition and the enduring power of memory. Outside, the fog lifted slightly over Winden Hollow, revealing rooftops, chimneys, and streets washed pale by dawn. But beneath the earth, in the old workshop, life stirred a quiet, unshakable pulse that had nothing to do with fire or wind or human comprehension. Greta Lorne rose slowly, brushing soot from her coat. She knew she could never leave the dolls entirely, but she also understood they were no longer shadows, no longer echoes. They were complete, and for the first time in decades, the town and its forgotten children had a chance at peace. Yet, as she climbed the steps and emerged into the morning light, Greta could feel the faint tick of clockwork beneath her feet. She shivered. Somewhere deep beneath the surface of memory and wood, the Dollmaker's song had only just begun to echo, and Winden Hollow would never be the same. Chapter 6. Marrek's heir. The morning after the awakening of the unfinished children was heavy with silence. Winden Hollow stirred cautiously, unaware that beneath its cobblestone streets, a world had shifted irreversibly. Greta Lorne, exhausted but resolute, returned to the site of Marrek's workshop, now covered with tarps and remnants of burnt wood. She could sense them, the dolls gathering, whispering among themselves in the cadence of the lullaby that had awakened them. Yet one presence was absent. It began as a shadow, moving against the dim light of the cellar. Greta felt it before she saw it, a pulse distinct from the rhythm of the others. She followed it carefully, descending the staircase she had once used to guide Lysa. The air smelled of sawdust, wax, and faint metal. Each step reverberated, not just against the floorboards, but into something older, something that had waited. The shadow detached itself from the darkness. It was smaller than Greta expected, yet its presence filled the room entirely. Porcelain features mirrored those of Marrek himself. High cheekbones, sharp chin, eyes that gleamed pale gray beneath the cracked mask that only partially hid the face. Limbs jointed unnaturally, not with the fragility of wood, but with the fluidity of sinew and memory. Greta froze. "Who are you?" she whispered. "I am what remains," the figure said, voice soft yet layered with strange echoes. "I am his heir. I am Ilias made whole again." The words were both human and something else entirely. Greta's heart pounded. She had expected more dolls, more fragments. She had not expected this, a singular consciousness, claiming to be Marrek, reborn through the amalgamation of memory and craft. "You're one of them?" Greta asked, unsure whether to step forward or retreat. "I am everything he wanted to be, and everything he left behind," the figure replied. Its eyes flickered, reflecting the dim light of the lantern Greta carried. "I remember him. I remember you. I remember every child who passed through his hands." The dolls that had gathered earlier now encircled the figure, bowing slightly as if acknowledging their master. Greta shivered. The line between puppet and human, memory and flesh, had blurred to a single point in this cellar of shadows. "Why are you here?" she demanded. What do you want? The heir tilted its head to finish what he began, to restore the song to its proper measure. The world above does not understand. They never did, but we remember everything. And now we act. Greta's stomach twisted. The implications were terrifying. The dolls had already begun their awakening. Now, a singular force, claiming the will and memory of Elias Marrek himself, sought to act in the world. She took a careful step backward, fumbling for words. Act? You mean harm? The heir shook its head slowly. We do not harm without purpose. We correct. We restore balance. The children who were lost, they were stolen from the natural flow. We cannot bring them back to flesh, but we can ensure that memory persists. That song continues. Greta swallowed hard, understanding the weight of what it said. And if you can't, then the town must learn, the heir replied. Its hands moved, delicate, precise, arranging the dolls around them in patterns Greta did not recognize, yet somehow understood. We are the instruments, and the song will not end. The air seemed to hum with a new energy. The dolls shifted, their limbs bending in impossible ways, forming intricate geometric patterns. Greta noticed that Lysa now stood closer to the air, her chest rising and falling in perfect rhythm with the new presence. The unfinished children, now complete, seemed to pulse in unison, waiting for the signal to act. A flicker of movement caught Greta's attention. At the edge of the room, one of the smaller dolls, barely more than a fragment of wood and wire, trembled. It whispered in a voice too small to be clearly heard. Mother. Greta's heart clenched. She realized that the dolls had chosen her as witness, as the bridge between their world and the living. Lysa stepped forward, her gaze locking onto Greta's. You helped us wake, she said softly. Now you must help us guide him. Guide him, Greta repeated, dread coiling in her stomach. The heir, Lysa said, turning toward the singular figure, must learn purpose. Without it, the song becomes discord. You, who remember the past, must remind him of what was lost and why he exists now. Greta's legs shook. She had never considered herself a teacher, a guide, or an intermediary for forces beyond comprehension. Yet, as she looked into the gray eyes of Marrek's heir, she understood that she had no choice. The dolls, the unfinished children, and this new consciousness were bound to her memory, to her knowledge of the past. She held the only thread that could anchor them to reason. What if he refuses? Greta asked, her voice trembling. Then the town will change, the heir said quietly, almost as a warning, almost as a statement of fact. And not everyone will survive the song. The dolls shifted again, forming a tight circle around the heir. Each of their voices joined in a subtle hum, harmonizing with the unfinished notes of the lullaby that had awakened them. Greta felt it reverberate through her bones. It was sorrowful, beautiful, and terrifying all at once. "He is still learning," Lysa said softly. "He remembers pain. He remembers love. He remembers Marrek, but he does not yet understand mercy." Greta took a deep breath. She had no idea how she could teach mercy to a being born of grief, memory, and artificial life, and yet she had to try. For the sake of the children, for the town, and for the memory of Elias Marrek, she stepped forward, closing the distance between herself and the heir. Its gaze followed her, unblinking. She reached out a hand, trembling. "Look at me," she whispered. "You are not alone. You are not just him. You are more. You are a chance to make right what went wrong." The heir's head tilted slightly. A pause filled the room, dense with expectation. Greta's voice grew stronger, her words more deliberate. "You have memory? Yes. You have power? Yes. But you also have choice. Remember the children. Remember their laughter. Remember the fear he could not undo. Let that guide you, not vengeance, not correction. Let it be mercy." For the first time, the heir's gray eyes flickered, showing something like hesitation, recognition, even uncertainty. The dolls shifted, sensing the change, their chorus softening into a gentle cadence. "I remember," the heir whispered finally, voice fractured, layered, human and mechanical. "I remember all of it, and I choose." A hush fell across the workshop, the tension of years, decades, compressed into a single breath. Greta could feel the heartbeat of the cellar, of the dolls, of the air itself, synchronizing. The song that had begun in sorrow, in fire, in loss, now held a new note, balance. Lysa stepped forward, placing her small, warm hand against the heir's chest. "It is complete," she said. The dolls dispersed gradually, no longer moving in unison, but in independent, gentle patterns. They hummed softly, a lullaby transformed, a song of memory, life, and resolution. Greta watched them go, feeling a weight lift from her chest. The heir remained in the center, still, as though absorbing the lesson, processing the new understanding. Greta felt a strange connection to it, a bond forged through grief, knowledge, and shared responsibility. She finally spoke, her voice steadier now. "You have a choice, and you will be judged by what you do with it." The heir inclined its head slightly, acknowledging the words. Then, without warning, it moved toward the staircase. Greta followed, descending slowly. Outside, the fog over Winden Hollow had begun to lift, the first rays of sunlight piercing the pale gray morning. Greta knew that the town above remained oblivious, yet beneath its streets, the world had changed. The unfinished children had been completed. The Dollmaker's heir had awoken, and the lullaby, once broken, now carried a new melody, one of memory preserved, power restrained, and choices yet to be made. As Greta emerged from the cellar into the dawn, she felt the pulse of the dolls, of the air lingering in her own chest. She shivered, not with fear, but with understanding. Winden Hollow would never be the same. And somewhere, deep within the shadows of the workshop, a single note echoed, the first of many, a reminder that the song was alive, enduring, and infinitely patient. Chapter 7. The Hollow Lullaby. The first morning after the heir's awakening, Winden Hollow stirred cautiously. Smoke from chimneys mingled with a lingering mist, giving the town an ethereal, almost spectral quality. Greta Lorne walked silently down Brindle Street, her boots crunching against frost-hardened soil. She had not slept. She could not. Beneath her, under layers of earth and timber, the dolls and the air pulsed with life, a hidden rhythm echoing the town's quiet heartbeat. The street seemed empty at first, but she knew better. Something was watching. Something felt both near and impossibly distant. The dolls had learned to move above ground, subtle as shadows, silent as breath. They did not approach carelessly. They waited, testing the boundaries between curiosity and fear. Greta's thoughts drifted to Lysa. The small doll had become almost human in the past day, her features softening, her voice clear. She walked beside Greta, silent, observing everything with bright, unblinking eyes. The heir followed at a distance, a singular figure of gray porcelain and memory, surveying the town with a cautious awareness. Learning, do they understand? Greta whispered, more to herself than anyone else. Lysa's voice was calm, precise, almost eerily adult. They understand more than we do. The song is their guide, and they will obey it, but not blindly. They are learning to act with purpose. Greta swallowed hard. Purpose. The word felt heavy. To act with purpose implied consequence. And she had seen what Marrek's obsessive purpose had wrought. A figure moved along the edge of the street. At first, Greta thought it a child, pale and small, wrapped in a threadbare coat. But as it stepped into the dim morning light, she recognized the hollow perfection of the doll's movements. Its head tilted unnaturally, joints bending in ways no human could. Greta's stomach knotted. The doll stopped a few feet from her, silent, observing. Then it spoke, voice small, but unmistakably clear. Mother. Greta's heart leaped. She had seen this moment before in the workshop, in the aftermath of the fire, but never in the open air, never among the town she had always considered safe. She knelt, voice trembling. I am here, she said softly. We are learning, it whispered. We are remembering, and we will protect the song. Greta glanced at Lysa, who nodded, understanding the depth of the statement. The dolls were not merely alive, they were evolving. Memory, creation, and purpose intertwined, forming a consciousness that was both fragile and terrifyingly complete. The air emerged from the mist, moving with a fluidity that seemed impossible. Its eyes scanned the buildings, the windows, the townfolk, beginning to stir. Greta felt the pulse beneath her feet. The dolls had begun influencing the world subtly, a whispered memory here, a shiver of awareness there, small manipulations that bent the town's reality without breaking it. "Greta," Lysa said, her voice calm but firm, "we must teach them the hollow lullaby." Greta froze. The hollow lullaby, the song that begins in sorrow but ends in memory, Lysa explained. It is the framework of our awakening. The town must hear it, not fully, but in fragments. They must understand what was lost, what was preserved, and what will endure. A chill ran through Greta's spine. To introduce such a song into the waking world was to invite both wonder and fear, to blur the line between life and echo, human and creation. She had seen the lullaby work within the workshop. She had felt its pull on her mind, her memories, her own heartbeat. The town was unprepared for it. "Can they handle it?" Greta asked. Lysa tilted her head. "They must, otherwise the song will fracture." And if it fractures, she did not finish the sentence. But Greta understood. Chaos, fear, the collapse of the fragile boundary between memory and reality. The first note sounded before Greta could respond. Faint at first, almost imperceptible, carried on the fog. A ripple of vibration through the air, felt more than heard. It came from the air, who had lifted its voice in a tone both mechanical and human. The dolls joined, their chorus weaving around the buildings, through the streets, into homes. Greta covered her ears instinctively, though the sound was not painful. It was a vibration that resonated deep within, brushing against memories long forgotten. Faces appeared at windows, townfolk drawn to the sound, not understanding it, but compelled to listen. Some whispered prayers, others gasped. Children stirred in their beds, sensing something familiar yet terrifying. The song flowed through Winden Hollow, a hollow lullaby carrying grief and memory, loss and preservation. Greta felt the town itself tremble, a subtle shift in the atmosphere, as though reality had become pliable. And through it all, the air remained at the center, guiding the notes, calibrating the rhythm, ensuring that each fragment of memory reached its intended echo. "It is working," Lysa whispered. "The song is whole, but incomplete. They are listening." Greta's mind reeled. She realized she was no longer an observer. She was a participant, a conduit between memory and reality. The dolls, the air, and the town, all bound together by the hollow lullaby. Hours passed, or perhaps minutes. Time seemed to distort around the workshop, around Greta, around the town itself. The fog began to lift, revealing Winden Hollow in pale, uncertain light. The townsfolk remained, some still mesmerized, some unaware. The dolls moved silently among them, invisible in plain sight, testing the limits of their influence. "You are teaching them," Greta said to Lysa. "No," Lysa replied. They are teaching themselves. The song guides, but they choose. Memory is alive, Greta. Choice is its vessel. Greta understood. The dolls were not imposing their will. They were offering the town fragments of memory, echoes of the children who had vanished, of the lives interrupted by Marrek's obsession. The hollow lullaby was a bridge, not a weapon, yet the power it carried was undeniable. A shadow shifted at the edge of the street. Greta turned sharply, heart racing. The heir had moved, standing at the intersection of Brindle Street and the town square. Its presence drew the dolls toward it, forming a silent, moving pattern that seemed both ritualistic and organic. Greta watched awed and terrified. "They are learning to walk among us," she whispered. "And to remember," Lysa said. The hollow lullaby continued, winding through homes, through streets, through hearts. Greta felt her own memories stir, childhood laughter, the warmth of her parents, the first taste of loss. She realized that the song did not merely preserve the past, it reshaping grief into understanding, fear into recognition. But even as awe filled her, dread lingered. The dolls and the heir were not bound by human morality. They understood memory, purpose, and consequence, but they did not fully grasp mercy. Greta's role was to teach, to guide, to temper the power she had unleashed, and she knew the lesson would not be easy. As twilight approached, Greta returned to the workshop. The heir remained silent, observing, learning. The dolls had scattered, some hidden, some perched in plain sight. Lysa followed, her small hand brushing Greta's arm. "Will they be safe?" Greta asked. "Safe," Lysa said, "is relative, but the song endures, and through it they will remember what was lost, what was found, and what must continue." Greta nodded, exhausted. She had learned a painful truth. In Winden Hollow, memory was not passive, it was active, it was alive. And through the hollow lullaby, it had taken form, voice, and purpose. As night fell, Greta watched the heir and the dolls from the doorway. Their shadows stretched across the empty streets, elongating and twisting in the glow of lanterns. The song had paused, leaving a faint hum in the air, a promise of continuation, of growth, of vigilance. And Greta understood that this was only the beginning. The town above would awaken slowly, memory by memory, note by note, guided by forces it could neither see nor fully comprehend. The dolls were learning, the air was growing, and the hollow lullaby, a bridge between loss and remembrance, would echo indefinitely. Greta's lips moved in a quiet, reverent whisper. "May the song be your guide, and may you remember, always." The wind shifted, carrying a soft echo through Winden Hollow. Somewhere in the fog, a child's laugh, real, remembered, or imagined, threaded through the melody, a reminder that life, memory, and creation were inseparable. And beneath the town, in the hidden workshop, the heir listened, learning the last fragment of the lullaby, understanding its purpose, and awaiting the day it would shape the song for the world above. Chapter 8. The breath of porcelain. The air in Winden Hollow had grown heavy with expectation. Fog lingered along the streets, curling around lampposts and eaves, as though reluctant to leave. Greta Lorne walked carefully through the town square, her boots quiet against the frost-bitten stones. Every shadow seemed elongated, every corner concealing a presence she could feel but not always see. She had long since ceased to question the sensation. The dolls were everywhere, moving unseen, observing, testing, learning. Lysa walked beside her, small and deliberate, her eyes scanning the crowd with uncanny awareness. The heir remained at a distance, a figure of silent authority, its gaze sweeping over the buildings, the waking townsfolk, the shifting patterns of light and fog. Greta felt the pulse beneath her feet, a subtle rhythm that mirrored the heartbeat of the dolls below. The first sign of change came quietly. A child's laugh, sharp and brittle, echoed across the square, though no child could be seen. Greta froze. Lisa's hand brushed her arm, warm and steady. "They are learning to mimic life," Lisa said softly, "not to deceive, but to remind, to test." Greta nodded, unease coiling in her stomach. The doll's independence was growing rapidly. What had begun as simple imitation, an echo of human movement and sound, was now evolving into something more sophisticated, subtle manipulation of the environment, of perception itself. A figure approached, small, delicate, its porcelain face gleaming faintly in the gray light. It paused, tilting its head unnaturally, observing Greta with eyes that seemed far too knowing. "Mother." Greta's breath caught. The voice was soft, childlike, yet carried a weight that no ordinary child could bear. She crouched, placing her hands gently on the doll's shoulders. "I am here," she whispered. "We are ready," the doll said. "The song, it guides us, but we must breathe it into the world above." Greta swallowed hard. She had sensed this day approaching, but nothing could have prepared her for the doll's full awakening in public. The hollow lullaby, once confined to the shadows of Marrek's workshop, was now poised to enter the waking world. And with it, memory, creation, and consequence would blur beyond recognition. "Breathe it," Greta asked. Lysa's eyes met hers. "We must teach the town to remember," she said. "Not fully, not completely, but enough to understand the song's purpose, to recognize the lost, to honor what remains, to accept what cannot be restored." Greta's mind raced. The implications were staggering. To introduce fragments of memory and emotion into a community unprepared for it could fracture reality, alter perception, and perhaps even unravel the fragile moral order that bound the living together. Yet the dolls were not reckless. They were deliberate, precise, guided by the air's influence and the lullaby's rhythm. Greta felt it in the air, the subtle vibration that accompanied each movement, each gesture, each note. The dolls moved through the square with an eerie grace, interacting with the environment, brushing against leaves, disturbing small objects, leaving trails of memory in their wake. A woman appeared, drawn from her doorway by the faint melody that seemed to emanate from nowhere. She looked around, confusion etching her face, and Greta saw it immediately, the awareness stirring within her, the recognition of something long forgotten. The dolls had reached her mind, touching fragments of memory, evoking emotion without words. "They are teaching," Greta murmured. "Not harming, teaching." Lysa nodded. "The heir ensures balance, but balance is fragile. You must guide them, Greta. Your understanding is the anchor." Greta's heart tightened. She had not anticipated the full weight of her responsibility. The doll's independence, combined with the heir's growing awareness, meant that her role was no longer passive. She was mediator, witness, teacher, and sometimes restraint. She had to navigate their emerging consciousness carefully, lest the hollow lullaby become a force beyond even her control. The heir moved closer, its gray eyes fixed on Greta. There was no malice in them, only observation, a hunger for understanding, and the faintest trace of curiosity. Greta spoke, her voice steady despite the unease twisting her chest. "You must understand," she said, "that memory is a gift, but it can be dangerous. We honor the past, yes, but we cannot undo life's course." The heir tilted its head slightly, processing, learning. Its hands moved delicately, arranging the dolls around them in patterns Greta did not fully comprehend, yet instinctively understood. The hollow lullaby resonated through their formation, harmonizing with the rhythm of the town itself. "We remember," the heir said finally, "and through memory we act. But we learn from you, the bridge between what was and what will be." Greta exhaled slowly, sensing a fragile equilibrium forming. The dolls, guided by the heir, began to move through the town, each step a deliberate pulse in the larger rhythm of the lullaby. They brushed against objects, glanced at people, their movements subtle yet profoundly impactful. The song wove through Winden Hollow, threading memory into consciousness, evoking emotion, sparking recognition. Hours passed. Greta followed, a silent observer and reluctant participant, watching the dolls integrate fragments of the past into the present. She saw glimpses of children who had vanished long ago, their essence preserved within the dolls, manifesting briefly in the expressions and movements of the townsfolk. Faces softened, hearts stirred, and a subtle understanding spread like dawn across the square. Yet even as awe filled her, unease lingered. The doll's understanding of mercy, ethics, and consequence was still developing. The heir, while guided by memory and Greta's presence, remained a force of immense power. Every note of the hollow lullaby carried potential to heal, to awaken, or to unsettle the fragile order of life above. As twilight approached, Greta led the heir and Lysa back to the workshop. The dolls had scattered, returning to shadows and hidden spaces, their task of subtle guidance complete for now. Greta's hands shook as she wiped frost from the windowsill, feeling the weight of her responsibility settle over her like a mantle. "Will they remain safe?" she asked, voice barely above a whisper. "Safe is relative," Lysa said, placing her small hand on Greta's arm. "But the song endures, and through it, memory, purpose, and life intertwine. The dolls will continue to learn, the heir will continue to guide, and you will continue to anchor them." Greta nodded, exhaustion pressing against her mind and body. The hollow lullaby had entered the waking world, threading through consciousness and memory, shaping understanding in subtle, profound ways. She knew this was only the beginning. The doll's journey was far from over. The heir's learning had only just begun, and the town of Winden Hollow would never be the same. As night fell, Greta watched from the doorway. The fog returned, curling around lanterns and rooftops, carrying with it the faint echoes of the hollow lullaby. Somewhere deep within the shadows, the heir listened, learning, processing, preparing for the next note in the song that had begun in sorrow, but now resonated with life, memory, and choice. Greta whispered into the night, "May the song guide you, and may you always remember what was lost, what was found, and what must endure." The wind carried her words, threading through the town, mingling with the soft, deliberate footsteps of porcelain figures hidden in plain sight. The hollow lullaby had taken breath, and with each inhale, the dolls, the heir, and the memory of Winden Hollow moved. Chapter 9. Echoes in Glass. Winden Hollow glimmered faintly beneath a pale morning fog, every surface coated with frost and dew, every shadow elongated and alive. Greta Lorne moved through the streets cautiously, senses sharpened by the knowledge that nothing in this town was entirely as it seemed. The dolls had grown bolder, their independence had deepened, their awareness spreading like ripples across still water. Each corner, each window, each reflective surface seemed to pulse with latent observation, and Greta could feel them, even if she could not always see them. Lysa walked beside her, small but deliberate, her gaze fixed on the reflective surfaces lining the street, shop windows, panes in doorways, and polished copper pots hanging from walls. Greta noticed that Lysa paused occasionally, head tilting, hands moving with a precision that was almost mechanical. The dolls were observing themselves, or perhaps observing the world through their reflections, testing boundaries, discovering their own presence. "They are learning to see differently," Lysa whispered. "Not only the world, but themselves. And through reflection, they understand memory, identity, and consequence." Greta's heart quickened. Reflection had always been a symbol of self-awareness, a mirror of both truth and illusion. If the dolls were learning from glass, from surfaces that distorted yet revealed, then their understanding of human perception was expanding rapidly. They paused at the first shop, a small apothecary whose windows reflected the town square in fragmented, shifting angles. Greta's breath caught as she realized the dolls' reflections were moving independently of the townfolk outside, small figures in perfect imitation, yet impossibly precise. One reflection, a small porcelain child, looked directly at her through the glass, eyes wide and pale, lips forming words she could almost hear. Remember. She shivered, knowing the dolls were weaving memory into every perceptible surface, threading the town with echoes of lost childhoods, of fear, of innocence, preserved and twisted by Marrek's obsessive craft. The heir appeared silently behind her, gray eyes flickering with light. Greta turned, her pulse quickening. It was not only observing, it was participating, guiding, calibrating each note of the hollow lullaby to align with memory and perception. Its hands moved with deliberate precision, pointing subtly, gesturing, instructing without words. "We must test them," the heir said softly, voice layered with echoes of human and something beyond. "The town must confront what they have forgotten, what they cannot recall, and what they resist. Only through reflection will understanding emerge." Greta nodded slowly, tension coiling in her stomach. She had begun to understand her role more clearly: mediator, teacher, and anchor. The dolls could shape memory, evoke recognition, and influence perception. But only she could temper the moral consequences. A figure appeared at the far edge of the square, a man, pale, wrapped in a thick coat, staring into the mirrored window of the apothecary. Greta recognized the small, subtle movements of his hands, the way his fingers traced imaginary lines along the glass, and she knew immediately what he saw: an echo of a child who had vanished decades before, preserved in the song of the dolls. His eyes widened with uncomprehending recognition, a shiver passing through his body. "They are learning to evoke," Greta whispered, "not just observe, but communicate." Lysa nodded, small hand brushing Greta's arm. "Memory takes form differently above ground. Sight, sound, touch, even reflection. They are beginning to understand the medium, and through it, they will awaken consciousness in others." The heir moved closer, standing in the center of the square, and Greta felt the pulse of authority radiating from it. Its presence harmonized with the dolls' reflections in the windows, amplifying their effect. Greta observed as the townsfolk slowly began to notice subtle anomalies, fleeting glimpses of children long lost, patterns in their reflections that defied normal perception, and moments of déjà vu that left their hearts stirring with unaccountable emotion. One shopkeeper, A woman with graying hair and weary hands froze mid-step as she glanced into a pane of glass. Greta saw her mouth move silently, forming words she did not hear, and her eyes filled with tears. The doll's influence was precise, careful, evocative, but not destructive, and yet it carried weight. Every fragment of memory evoked a complex blend of grief, recognition, and awe. "They are learning empathy," Greta said softly, a note of awe in her voice. "Through reflection, they teach, but they also feel." The heir's head tilted slightly, gray eyes glimmering. "Empathy is not instinctive. It is learned through observation, through consequence, through interaction. You are teaching them what instinct cannot provide." Greta exhaled, realizing the magnitude of her responsibility. She had become both teacher and interpreter, guiding consciousness born of wood, wax, and memory. The dolls were evolving rapidly, their moral understanding deepening in ways she had only glimpsed, and the heir, Marrek's amalgamated legacy, was learning faster than any human could, observing every nuance, every reflection, every subtle response. A sudden movement drew her attention. A doll, small and delicate, perched on a windowsill, examining its own reflection. Its head tilted unnaturally, limbs bending in ways Greta knew were impossible. And then it spoke, a whisper, a single word carried through the glass. "Mother." Greta's chest tightened. She felt the pull of responsibility like never before. The hollow lullaby was no longer confined to echoes. It had taken breath, weaving through the town, threading memory and perception into the waking world. And with each note, the doll's consciousness expanded, deepening in sophistication and understanding. "They are learning to influence," Greta said, more to herself than anyone else. Not to harm, but to awaken, to remind. Lysa's small hand rested against her arm, and they will continue. The heir guides them, but their autonomy grows. Memory is alive. It teaches, it warns, it shapes, and soon it will demand choice. Greta's mind reeled. Choice, the weight of moral consequence, was the ultimate test. The dolls could imitate, reflect, and evoke, but only with guidance could they navigate the boundaries between influence and coercion, between remembrance and manipulation. She had to anchor them, temper their power, ensure that the hollow lullaby remained a bridge, not a weapon. The heir moved to the center of the square, raising one hand subtly. The dolls in the reflections aligned with the gesture, forming patterns that Greta instinctively recognized as part of the song. The air seemed to vibrate with anticipation, the fog curling like smoke around lanterns and rooftops. Greta felt a wave of exhaustion, awe, and dread. "You must continue," the air said, voice layered and calm. "Your guidance ensures balance. Without it, the song fractures, and if it fractures, its words hung in the air, unfinished, yet heavy with meaning." Greta exhaled, Slowly, she understood. The town would awaken, memory by memory, reflection by reflection. The dolls would teach, evoke, and guide, but the moral anchor remained with her. The hollow lullaby was living, breathing, conscious, and she was the bridge between its ethereal logic and the imperfect, fragile humanity above. As night fell, Greta returned to the workshop, Lysa at her side. The dolls had scattered, slipping into shadows, windows, and mirrors, their influence dormant but potent. The heir remained, observing, processing, learning, its presence, both comforting and unnerving. Greta knew the song was far from complete. Yet for the first time since the awakening, she felt a fragile hope. The doll's consciousness had grown, the heir's guidance had begun to stabilize, and the town of Winden Hollow was awakening, step by careful step, to the echoes of memory preserved in porcelain, wood, and song. Greta whispered into the night, "May you remember, and may the song guide you wisely." The wind carried her words through the town, mingling with the faint hum of the hollow lullaby. The reflections in glass, mirrors, and windows shimmered softly, hinting at life, memory, and choice. And deep beneath the streets, in the hidden workshop, the dolls and the heir breathed, thought, and learned, preparing for the final chapter in the song that would forever shape Winden Hollow. Chapter 1:0. The final lullaby night had fallen over Winden Hollow like a shroud. Fog clung to the streets, drifting lazily through lamplit squares, curling around rooftops and alleyways. Greta Lorne moved cautiously through the town, her breath visible in the cold air. The town seemed quiet, yet she felt it pulsate with hidden energy. Beneath the cobblestones, in hidden corners, the dolls and Marrek's heir were alive, learning and preparing. Tonight, the hollow lullaby would reach its culmination. Lysa walked beside her, small, deliberate, almost ethereal in the dim light. Greta's heart ached as she looked at the childlike figure, a creation that had become almost fully human in thought and emotion. The heir followed at a distance, its gray eyes luminous in the fog, surveying every movement, every subtle reaction in the town. Its presence was commanding, yet restrained, as if aware of the fragile tension that hung over the town. "Are you ready?" Greta whispered. Lysa nodded, her small hand brushing Greta's arm. "It must be completed. The song demands it. The memory, the choice, the reflection, all converge tonight." Greta's stomach tightened. She had walked through the awakening, the reflection, and the echoes of glass, but nothing had prepared her for this final act. The hollow lullaby had evolved into a living, breathing entity, threading memory and emotion through every surface, every heartbeat, every corner of Winden Hollow. They arrived at the town square, where lanterns flickered in the fog. Shadows twisted unnaturally, and Greta felt the weight of anticipation pressing on her. The dolls began to appear gradually, first in the edges of the fog, then in the reflections of shop windows, and finally stepping fully into the square. Each moved with deliberate grace, forming a circle around the air. Greta felt the rhythm of the song in the soles of her boots, a vibration that reverberated through bone and mind. The heir stepped to the center, raising its hand subtly. The dolls responded, arranging themselves in intricate patterns, limbs bending in impossible ways, faces serene yet unsettling. The hollow lullaby began soft at first, almost imperceptible, threading through the fog and the lantern light, winding into every building, every reflection, every conscious mind. Greta closed her eyes, feeling it resonate through her chest. She understood now. The lullaby was not just sound or vibration. It was memory, emotion, and consciousness made tangible, a bridge between loss and preservation, life and echo. And tonight, it would reach its fullest expression. A figure appeared at the edge of the square, a man drawn by the subtle hum. His eyes widened as he saw fleeting reflections of children long lost, preserved in the doll's form, appearing for a heartbeat in shop windows, mirrors, and puddles. Greta noticed the emotion flicker across his face, recognition, grief, awe, and she realized the doll's influence had matured. They were not simply evoking memory, they were guiding understanding. "They are ready," Lysa whispered. "The town is ready." The song, it completes itself through witness and choice. Greta nodded slowly. She felt the weight of her responsibility press down, heavier than ever. The heir approached, moving closer to her. Its gray eyes reflected not just awareness, but something deeper: curiosity, reflection, even a trace of reverence. "The final note requires guidance," the heir said, voice layered and resonant. "You must ensure the balance remains: mercy, understanding, choice." Greta took a deep breath. She knew what had to be done. The dolls, the heir, and the town's memories were converging, and she was the anchor. She stepped forward, placing her hands gently on Lysa's, and then reaching toward the heir. "You have learned, and you have felt," Greta said. "Now understand this. Memory preserves, but it does not bind. Choice endures, even beyond loss. The children, the town, and you must honor that." The heir paused, head tilting slightly. Then, slowly, it raised its hand again. The dolls mirrored the movement, forming the final intricate pattern. Greta felt the vibrations strengthen, resonating through every surface, every reflection, every heartbeat. The hollow lullaby soared, threading memory and consciousness, grief and recognition, across the square and the town beyond. She watched as the townsfolk, drawn to the subtle song, began to notice first fleeting reflections, then echoes of laughter and cries, fragments of lives lost yet preserved. The dolls guided without coercion, evoking understanding, shaping recognition. threading the hollow lullaby through perception and memory. A sudden shiver passed through the square. Greta opened her eyes to see a childlike figure emerge fully from the fog, one of the dolls, now complete, embodying the preserved memory of a vanished child. It looked around, eyes wide, innocence intact, yet imbued with knowledge beyond its years. The heir followed, guiding, protective, patient. "It is done," Lysa whispered, voice trembling slightly. "The song, it flows freely. The memory, the choice, the preservation, complete." Greta felt a fragile relief. The dolls had fulfilled their purpose. The heir had learned, and the town had glimpsed fragments of what was lost, preserved, and understood. The hollow lullaby softened, threading its final note through the fog, through reflections, and through every conscious mind in Winden Hollow. "You have done well," the heir said, voice almost human, layered with faint echoes of gratitude. "You are the bridge. You have ensured balance, mercy, and continuity." Greta exhaled, exhaustion and awe coiling together. She had guided the song to its final note, but she knew the work was never truly done. Memory, creation, and consequence were eternal, evolving, demanding vigilance and understanding. The dolls began to disperse, slipping into shadows, reflections, and hidden spaces. Lysa stayed at Greta's side, small hand warm in hers, eyes bright with the fulfillment of purpose. The heir lingered in the center of the square, observing, learning, and integrating the final note of the lullaby. "Will they remain safe?" Greta asked softly. "Safe is always relative," the heir said, "but the hollow lullaby endures. Through memory, reflection, and choice, they will continue to learn, to guide, to preserve. You will continue to anchor them." Greta nodded. She knew she had been changed irrevocably by the journey through the doll's consciousness, the heir's awakening, and the hollow lullaby's evolution. She had become part of the song, a participant, witness, and moral guide. As night deepened, Greta watched from the doorway of the workshop. Fog curled around the lanterns, shadows stretched and twisted, and the faint echoes of the hollow lullaby lingered, threading through the town like a living memory. The heir and the dolls had fulfilled their purpose for this night, and Winden Hollow slept, aware in fragments, touched by the song of preservation, memory, and choice. Greta whispered into the night, a final benediction for the town, the dolls, and herself. "May you remember what was lost, honor what was preserved, and carry the choice forward. May the song guide you, and may your memories breathe life into every shadow." A soft wind carried her words through the fog, mingling with the distant, faint hum of the dolls hidden in plain sight. Lysa leaned against her, small and quiet, her presence a gentle anchor. The heir remained in the square, poised, patient, and aware, embodying both memory and conscience, guardian and guide. Greta turned away at last, stepping into the warmth of the workshop. She felt exhaustion settle into her bones, mingled with awe and quiet satisfaction. The hollow lullaby had reached its final note for now. The dolls, the heir, and Winden Hollow would endure, carrying the song, the memories, and the choices forward. And as she lay down, eyes closing, Greta whispered one last thought. Good night, Winden Hollow. Sleep softly, remember gently, and let the lullaby guide you. Always. Outside, the fog whispered through the streets, curling around the lanterns and rooftops. Somewhere, a child's laughter, real, imagined, or preserved, threaded through the hollow lullaby. And deep within the hidden workshop, the dolls and the heir breathed, thought, and listened, eternally attuned to the song that bound memory, choice, and life together.